Today's topic is following REST in Rails. So here's a quick simple rule. Do it. Follow REST. Now, by the way, if you don't know what REST is, this screencast is going to be a bit over your head, so read this guide instead. But for the rest of you, follow REST. Now, today we're going to take a look at an application that is not following REST. It has some non-RESTful actions. I'm going to refactor them, and we'll talk about why it has caused some positive change in our program. So let's take a look at the routes. And we can see fairly quickly that we have two non-RESTful actions right here. The dead giveaway is that we're not using resource or resources in front of them. Instead, we're using this put helper. And it has to deal with admins. So we are updating a user's status to be an admin or removing that status, both non-RESTful. And by the way, a great smell to know about here is to realize that a RESTful route looks like this. We have a noun and a verb, right? Users create. Non-RESTful routes often look like this. And that's what we have here. We have a users make admin. And that is a great sign that you are not following REST and could have some improvement in your code if you do start doing it. But let's actually move in that direction. I want to take these two routes and I want to switch them to actual RESTful routes. And I like to start, as with most things, in the view. I like to start outside in. And so I'm going to start writing the code I wish I had right from the view. So let's go over to users show. Here we have the UI for this, which is very simply, if you are an admin, we can demote you, and if you're not, we can promote you. And I'm going to start by referencing a path that I wish existed already. So let's pretend there's an admin or user admin path. And as opposed to doing a put, I'm not updating a user here. I'm not thinking about this as, instead of updating a user, I'm creating an admin. And so let's just delete this little method bit because the default for button 2 is create. And this will map to the create action on a new controller for admins. So let's go ahead and pull up my spec for this. And I'm going to run this. And you'll see me do this a bunch of times in the screencast. And you can see right off the bat, we have an undefined method user admin path. And that's because I just referenced a route that doesn't actually exist. Go back to our routes, and let's create this. So resource admin. And I'm going to do only here. I like to do that, only create the exact actions I need in my routes and add them as needed so as not to clutter up my routes file or my list of routes. And you can see that our error has changed and now we are missing an admin's controller, which is great. So let's go create that. Great, and now we are missing the create action. And now we're getting a bit of a weird error, and that's because this action isn't rendering any actual HTML, and so Capybara can't find our text that we're looking for. But this is actually the error we do want. And so let's copy over from our users controller how we actually create an admin. And we are going to need this method down here. Find user, only this is now user ID because we moved the route around. And excellent, we're just missing a show. Actually, we don't want to render this. Let's redirect to the user after we update them. Excellent, so we're green again. And now let's step back for a second. Hopefully you'll notice that I started at the outside and then just followed the errors that my tests exposed. That's a thing I do all the time. I'd write code that I wish I had, and then I let the tests tell me what to do next. Well, let's do this for the other route as well. Let's pop over to this route. Now I also want to be able to remove people's admin status. So for this we're going to say this maps to actually destroy. Actually, let's remove this, by the way. We don't need this anymore. But let's come back over here, and our test should still pass. Yep. And now we're going to change this to destroy. And nope, I didn't TDD it. Back to user show. Here we go. Here, we're going to do this, and this time our method instead of put is going to be delete. For some reason, delete maps to destroy. It's a little confusing, but hey. Okay, so now we're getting complaints about no routes. We'll say now that should fix that. Can't find the action in admin's controller, which is great. So let's do this. Getting that weird error again. -8 to -4 co dot. Copy the body of that method in. Only here we're going to go to false. And we're back to green, which is cool. Now we can go back to our routes and let's just make sure we're still green. We are. So we've done a nice little change here. Let's go look at the diff real quick. Remove admin user path, make admin user path. I like this diff so far. These two custom routes are gone, and now instead we just have this nice simple admin resource nested under users. And the thing I like is that we went from this noun verb noun of like users make admin to noun verb, which is admin create, admin destroy. This is actually a nice win. This is one of those Rails conventions you should totally stick with. Now, something to notice, and something that often trips people up, is we have this thing called admin's controller, but there's no admin model, right? I'll pop up and I'll prove it. Like, there's no admin here in this list of models. And so, is that allowed? Is that okay? Answer, yeah, it's totally okay. You can absolutely do this. And this is one of those realizations that will have a really nice effect on the code you write, because it will make it clearer to you that you can write controllers for small slices of your application. You can write controllers that do a very simple thing and work with a very simple noun and do well-defined verbs to it. Now let's look at a situation that's a little bit more subtle, a little bit even more implicit. So if we look at our routes here, we have some orders resources, and these are both RESTful routes, the show and update on this orders noun. And so this looks like we are following REST for orders. But let's actually pop open the controller. And you'll see there's actually some shenanigans going on in this controller, and that happens here. So one thing you can do in this application is refund an order. And if you refund an order, we need to send an email. We want to send a notification about that refunding. Now, the easiest thing to do when you have a requirement like this is to just jam it into something that already exists. So we already had this orders controller and already had this update method. And so we said, well, I'm updating a field on order, so it should probably go through the orders controller and use the update method. And that's a very reasonable assumption to make, but we can actually do something a little bit better. Just because we're updating a field on order, or before updating an admin field on user, doesn't mean we can't make a new controller for it. And it also doesn't mean we can't make an object to help us do that. So let's refactor this thing as well. And by the way, like, it's worth noticing, like, because we have jammed this functionality into the update method, every time we update order, we need to check, was order just refunded? And to do that, we have to use these kind of somewhat hairy active record helpers to figure out, hey, did the refunded value just change? And if it did it change from false to true? And if so, then send that email. Otherwise, move on. And every time I see nested ifs like this inside a controller, I think this could be better. I'd rather have my controller look really simple. So let's fix this thing as well. So I'm going to do it in the same way. Here's my order spec, and I want you to notice something about my order spec. We're checking three things in the spec. First, we check the UI and say, did the order actually, does it say the order was refunded? Then we check if an email actually got sent, and we check if the field on the order in the database actually got updated to true. Now, I would argue that these last two shouldn't be here, but we're going to come back to that. So let's run the spec first. Okay, we're green for now. Let's go to, yes, here, the view. We're going outside in again. So let's again write that code we wish we had, which is, as opposed to just order path, what if it was refund order path? And then we wouldn't need to pass in that refunded true bit. And also we could use create as opposed to put. Let's see how we fail. Refund order path is undefined. So let's add it. Refund. Oh, I got it backwards. Let's do this. Order refund path. Excellent, cool. So we're missing the refunds controller. Let's make one. Great, we got it. Now we just need to make the create action. Cool, and we get that goofy error again. So now, what are we going to do? Let's pop open the orders controller again, and let's steal a little bit. Well, let's start. We're going to say let's redirect to the order. I'm going to again write I'm going to work a little bit backwards. I can't redirect to nil. Order is going to be order.find. Great. So this didn't blow up, but we didn't actually refund the thing. Now what we want to do is say order.update refunded true. And I think, great, so this is complaining about the email. Last email subject was supposed to be order refunded, but instead there's nil. There's no last email. So now let's just copy this over here. Oh, look at that. Excellent, and we're green again. And now, since we're green, and we've moved this functionality, we can go delete stuff. So first thing I want to delete is all this junk right here, which is beautiful, which means I can come down here and delete this junk, which I love, and we'll make sure we're still green, which we are. Something to notice here. We have here a refunds controller, and the refunds controller is sort of nounifying this idea that an order can be refunded. But what if we took it to the next level? Notice that we do two things. Go back to our spec, by the way. And there's three things we're concerned with: the UI, the email, and the database. And I mentioned before that I thought these two should not be here. So is there a better place for these assertions? And I would argue that you should listen to when you feel like there could be a better place. And in this case, I would say there totally is. So let's make a new class. Let's start extracting this into its own class. So let's do this. Rather than just jamming this in here, let's make a new refund, and we'll pass in the order, and we'll just call run on it. And we'll blow up because there's no such thing as a refund. And now we're getting an error because it expects the initialize method doesn't expect any arguments, but we're passing it in down here. We're passing in this order. And at this point, I want to stop actually for a second, because what I'd like to do now is, now that I've dropped down to a model level, I'd actually like to start writing model specs to drive my behavior for what should happen. Let's go one level further. Let's do this. Let's check out this error. Undefined method run for refund, fine. Great, okay. So now this error is telling us basically like, hey, you didn't actually refund me. It didn't work. And so now I want to drop down to that model spec level. So let's do this. Let's make a new model spec. And let's start describing that run method. What does it do? It sends an email, and it updates a column. Those tests both pass because they have no assertions in them. So we're done. No, just kidding. We have work to do. Let's start by stealing the assertions over here. I'm just going to grab this whole hog. So I want to say, I often like to work my tests bottom to top. So I'll start with my expectation. Say, I expect the last email subject to equal order refunded. And it was actually nil. Okay, well, how do I get it to not be nil? I need to call refund on an order, and I need to call run on that. Order is not defined. That's fine. We can make one. And notice I'm just working bottom to top. And we did not actually do anything. So we called the method, but nothing actually happened. So now we're getting the error we expect, which is, hey, you didn't work. So in here, let's actually send the mailer. Order mailer, oops. Order mailer dot refund notification of order dot deliver. Cool. And now we're sending that email. And then bring this bad boy up here. Same deal. I'm going to work bottom to top. I'm going to start with my expectation. Let's do this. Didn't work, which we would have expected. Pass it in. Still doesn't work. And the reason is because we're not doing the actual order dot update bang refunded true. Ka-chow. Excellent. So now I can go ahead and delete both these things. And look what we have now. A nice high-level feature spec that focuses on the UI, doesn't dig into the database, doesn't look at emails sent. A nice targeted model spec that handles the details and cares about things like sending emails and updates columns. And a beautiful, small, plain Ruby object. And notice, we have a refunds controller. And this refund controller references a refund object, but this is not an active record object, right? This doesn't inherit from anything. And that's awesome. That's totally okay. Just like before, where you can have a controller that doesn't point towards an active record object. It can point to some object or no object. You can be flexible. Do what you want. And this is great, by the way. This class, this is a big win. Because whenever we want to process a refund, all the logic lives in here. This class will act like a magnet in the future for more behaviors that have to do with refunding, and that is a nice thing. This is a perfect home, a nice wide open home with lots of space to build inside, and that is awesome. So that's it for this time. Recommendation, follow REST in your Rails applications. Pay attention to the controllers that it encourages you to create, and then when you create those controllers, see if it makes sense to extract an object to live in your models directory as a plain old Ruby object, or maybe even a real active record object. I think it'll do good things for you. See you next time.